Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking a look at one of the earlier spin-offs in Image Comics with Codename Stryke Force #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1994, we can see Stryker, of course, featured front and center on the cover. This makes perfect sense as this book was coming hot off the heels of the Cyberforce miniseries. So he would have been the only character that anyone would have been super familiar with at this point. Now, at the end of the Cyberforce miniseries in issue number 4, we did get an introduction to the rest of the Stryke Force team. Of course, it just happened as a little small preview story, nothing really going on. It was more or less just like a way for people to learn the names of the new characters. Those characters, of course, being Black Anvil, who we see pictured here on the front cover, Tempest, Bloodbow, and the greatest creation of Marc Silvestri's entire career, Killraiser. There's also 3 covers to this book. Unfortunately, I only have 2 of them, but the other one is a gold embossed cover that looks like this. As you can see, this is very similar to the gold embossed cover that we saw of Wildcats #1 for the original Wildcats miniseries. However, I will say I like this one a lot better as it is not like the super high gloss reflective surface. This one's got a duller finish to it, so it's actually way easier to film. Big shout out to Marc Silvestri for realizing that some guy he never met was going to be making videos 30 years after the fact about this cover, and he made it easy for me. Thanks a lot, Marc. There's also another embossed cover that exists for this book, however, that is a blue embossed cover. It's kind of weird that they would choose blue as the color for that. You would have thought they would have gone with another precious metal type of color like silver or I guess platinum, which isn't that different. But, blue was an odd choice, and I can't find any information that really talks about how many copies they made of the 2 embossed covers. If you happen to know what they are, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I did some digging. I could find no information regarding the numbers. And, despite the fact that I don't feel like they were high numbered copies of these, I can tell you that I only ever saw 1 copy of the gold embossed cover ever, and I bought it. That's the one you're looking at right now. And I've never seen the blue one until I started trying to do research on the gold one and found a few expired listings on eBay for it. So they're not prevalent, but I also don't think they're really that valuable. I can tell you right now, 9/8 copies of this gold embossed one tend to retail for about $100 as I'm recording this video. So that could be due to higher numbers than I realize existing, or the fact that most people probably aren't that enthusiastic about buying gold embossed covers of Codename Stryke Force #1. We're a small and select group of people who really care about this comic. Pencils, Brandon Peterson. Plot, script, Marc Silvestri. Inks, Joseph Rubinstein. Letters, Chris Aliopoulos and Mike Heisler. Colors, Joe Chiodo. Editor, David Wall or Woll. I'm not certain, and I apologize for whichever one of those was wrong. We can see here on the first cover, or on the first page, that there is a formation of jets that are flying over the ocean. They are led by Beavis Leader because this is Butthead Group. And I understand that would have been a topical joke at the time. But given the seriousness of the fact that this is a terrorist organization speeding towards a target that they intend on, assaulting, it seems odd that they would have chosen those names. Again, I understand that Mark was probably just trying to make a topical joke, but still seems like a weird choice, especially for the context of the story. The leader is telling the rest of the people in the group that, they're going to have to hit this hard and fast. He wants casualties kept to an absolute minimum. And that if they mess up on this mission, that their boss is going to be really mad and they're going to face some pretty steep consequences if things aren't executed according to plan. Meanwhile, at the port of Sevastopol, if I'm saying that correctly, in the Ukraine is currently holding a ceremony to hand over the world's largest nuclear submarine, which is this crazy looking thing, to the United Nations. We see here a man named Vladimir, who I don't know if he's supposed to be representing the Ukrainian president in this story, but I did look it up, and the Ukrainian president was not named Vladimir in 1994, so perhaps not. He's talking about how he's happy to be, working with the rest of the world and trying to bring about peace. This, of course, is hot on the heels on the fall of the former Soviet Union. And this is supposed to represent former COMBLOC states trying to integrate with the rest of the Western world. He's talking about how, this weapon was supposed to be used for the Soviets to cause terror around the globe, but now it's going to be used to ensure peace and try to prevent the world from falling into chaos. Right behind him, we see a man wearing a trench coat and another gray-haired man sitting in front of him. Now, the man in the coat, of course, is none other than Stryker, and he's here because he's been paid to be a private bodyguard for none other than President Bill Clinton. Now, I want to point out, at no point is the last name Clinton used in this story, but he is referred to as Mr. President by Stryker, and he then tells Stryker to call him Bill. He starts to question the necessity of Stryker's presence as, of course, he has protection from the Secret Service and all other manners of military protection, as there are foreign dignitaries from all over the world at this procession. But Stryker states that his wife hired him to make sure that, he kept the president safe. And, the president's saying, hey man, we're paying you $10 million and that seems kind of steep. I don't know if we have that kind of money. And Stryker says, that's okay because your wife said that you could work out a tax break deal for me. Clinton just laughs at this, but we see in the little thought bubble at the end that Stryker says he really thinks I'm joking, meaning that Hillary, I guess, did promise some sort of tax write-off for all this, though I don't know how you write off mercenary work exactly. It's a weird scenario. Also, I feel like the Clintons probably had $10 million to spend on this kind of thing, if you catch my drift. After finishing his short conversation with the president, Stryker starts to get a sensation that something isn't right here and decides to radio in with his partner for this mission, a man named Icarus, who's running recon and kind of flying around to make sure everything's okay. So he radios and asks if Icarus is around, to which he replies, sure, I'm right here. We then get an advertisement for the Killer Instinct storyline that was taking place between Cyber Force and Wildcats. This, of course, is heavily involving Ripclaw and Warblade. I haven't gotten into any of this, but I will eventually because I have all of these issues, and we'll be getting further into that storyline and exploring it as I get to making videos about Wildcats number 5, Cyber Force number 1, and all the other Cyber Force number 2, Wildcats, number 6, 7, and 8. It's one of those storylines that bounces around between multiple issues of 2 different comic book series. So it'll take a little while to get through all of it, but I promise I've got all those issues and I will get to it eventually. We then get our first introduction to Icarus as we see him flying overhead, surveying the crowd underneath. And Stryker says, hey man, I got a really bad feeling that something's not going right. And Icarus knows Stryker well enough to realize that he needs to pay attention here, as generally Stryker's right when he gets these kind of feelings. And before either one of them can act upon any of this and try and formulate some kind of a plan, they suddenly see a huge explosion go off in the middle of the crowd of the event. And then we see the 5 planes that we saw at the beginning of the story flying overhead, firing off more shots, and causing all sorts of chaos as everyone in the crowd scrambles and starts to run for their life. Now, this might seem okay at first, given that obviously they're a terrorist organization, they're causing terror. However, we saw at the beginning that the leader of the assault team stated no more casualties than absolutely necessary. So if that's the case, why would you start off by just dropping an explosive charge via bomb or missile right into the middle of this crowd? That's the way you're starting off? Let's just kill a few hundred right off the bat, even though we want to keep casualties to a minimum? That doesn't make any sense. We then see a bunch of jump troops descending down from the planes as they fly overhead. They're all wearing jetpacks armed with laser pistols, As they descend on the event, the security starts to open fire on them. Stryker states to Icarus, hey, it's only our job to protect one person. I need you down here so that we can protect the president, as he tells him to get down. We then see several of the troops landing and opening fire on the stage where the man, Vladimir, was speaking. And there's all kinds of chaos going on, explosions, Secret Service members returning fire. It's just an absolute mess right now, and Stryker's doing everything he can to make sure that Bill Clinton stays alive. Stryker then continues to yell at Icarus for not getting down to the president fast enough, but Icarus says that he can't help it. He's trying to stop the men who descended down from the planes as they're killing innocent civilians, which again goes against what they were told to do. They were supposed to just get down, accomplish their mission, as few casualties as possible, but they're just opening fire into the crowd. At this point, one of the Secret Service members, who doesn't really like Stryker all that much, says, hey, looks like there's dissension in your ranks. Why don't you let the professionals handle it? Stryker replies, hey, you've already lost 6 of your men. If I allow you guys to take care of this, the president is going to be dead in the next 3 minutes. He then once again yells at Icarus to get down to help him and protect the president, or he's dead meat. However, before Icarus can respond, he is shot through the back from behind by one of the terrorists, and things aren't looking too good for him as there's a huge laser blast going right through his chest. Meanwhile, on another part of the dock, we see that some of the terrorists have taken some foreign dignitaries hostage as one of the ships lands and more of the terrorists fall out. They are followed by this shadowy edgelord who is apparently their leader and is wondering why things aren't going as quickly as they should be. His number one, that he refers to as number one, states that, oh no, we're still within the window, but he tells him, no, we're not doing this as fast as we could be, and if you want your head to remain on your shoulders, you're going to get the thing going at the speed that we said it was going to be going, and we're going to get done on time, or there's going to be a real problem. So his number one just says, yes, sir, and hops to it. We then see the terrorist leader approach the hostages, and we get a much better look at his incredibly absurd costume. He states that they'll be accompanying him on his new yacht. They ask what his name is, but he says that's not important. Then the man who he yelled at before comes back and says that they've managed to secure the vessel and have taken out most of the crew with only a few stragglers hiding that they're going to take care of. He states that this is fine and that they're going to board the ship. However, I have to question the wisdom in this, as this is supposed to be apparently the world's most advanced nuclear submarine, so it seems kind of presumptuous that the terrorists would be able to just pilot this thing with no prior knowledge of how it works or what any of the controls are. Meanwhile, back on the stage, we see that things are starting to calm down a little bit as most of the terrorists are retreating onto the sub. We see that Clinton is still alive and unharmed as Stryker tells him to keep his head down, that he wants to make sure that everything's okay. However, the Secret Service member who was yelling at Stryker earlier tells Stryker to get away from the president, that he's already done enough harm, as they look out to see that the nuclear sub is making its way across the harbor and out into the open ocean. At this point, Stryker leaves as he is berated by some of the other people who were at the event, who are all stating that he didn't do enough and yelling at him for not protecting more people. However, Stryker is in fact more upset about the fact that his partner Icarus was killed in the skirmish, and he feels somewhat responsible for bringing someone as young, who, by the way, Icarus was only 22, and was also rather inexperienced on this mission. He believed that, it was going to be something easy, when it turns out it was something terribly difficult, and it was something that Icarus really wasn't ready for, and now he's got this young man's death on his hands. We then see an advertisement for Wizard number 32, which will come with a Wildcats trading card, a Chromium trading card nonetheless, and a original Spawn Batman jam cover by Todd McFarlane and Frank Miller. I don't know that I ever saw this. If you have a copy of Wizard number 32 or had one and would like to talk about what you saw on this cover, feel free to do so in the comments below. It seems pretty cool. Meanwhile, the story has fast-forwarded 6 months as the world is being held hostage by this nuclear sub. We see a news reporter talking about the fact that Authorities are no closer to finding the submarine and securing it, taking out the hostages, and they're also worried that the submarine's disappearance is also conveniently coinciding with a lot of nuclear arms that have been stolen, and they're very worried that whoever is in possession of this sub now has the means to do some real damage around the world and possibly start some major conflict. We then see a lot of people walking around a city outside of a electronics store, which has the news report playing on multiple televisions. We then see that the reporter states that there's a man that several networks are vying for the rights to make the television movie based on this event, which is kind of funny. It's really dating itself with the idea of TV movies, but it is kind of hilarious that all these network executives are like, yeah, we know the world's in imminent danger and things are looking really bad, but we really want to get some ratings out of this, if you know what I mean. Meanwhile, thousands of feet below the Atlantic Ocean, we see the submarine cruising around below the surface of the sea, and a member of the terrorist group who is very unhappy about the fact that he has to go and deliver some bad news to their leader. Mostly due to the fact that when their leader gets bad news, he has a tendency to execute the person who gave him the bad news. This is something they all refer to as their severance, which is basically a beheading, as we see that he reaches the control room, the bridge of the submarine, and timidly says, excuse me, sir. Also, this submarine is massive. It's stated as being 500 yards long, but more than just the length, you figure this is the bridge right here, and that's this section of the sub. This thing is absolutely enormous to the point that it's really almost comical in nature that they would ever devise or design a submarine of this magnitude when having something this large seems almost completely unnecessary. But then again, given some of the other projects that the Soviets were spending their money on and some of the other weapons and vehicles that they were trying to build, this does kind of fit in with their MO, so maybe Mark was onto something. It's at this point we find out the leader of the terrorist organization is called Death's Angel. That's right, folks. This is the pinnacle of 90s edge, as we can see this guy pretty good for the first time with his ridiculous costume. I mean, look at this. It's got these black angel wings with all kinds of just, spikes and cuts for all of the cloak. He's got all sorts of blades coming out of the side of his boots. His knee pads are spikes and blades. I mean, this is just gross overkill in terms of, super angst. I love it, but it's ridiculous. The man sent to deliver him the bad news tells him that they believe someone may have been able to figure out their location, despite them having cloaking devices on the sub, as they've spotted a craft flying around in the ocean near their location that seems to be getting closer to them, and they're worried that this craft might spell, disaster for their operation if it can sound the alarm and let the rest of the world know where this submarine is at. Death's Angel tells him to deal with this inconvenience or he'll be collecting his severance. This, of course, the threat of his head being chopped off. We then see that the vessel flying over the surface of the water is one that belongs to none other than Stryker and the rest of Stryke Force. They keep noticing that they find a blip, but then it disappears. This, of course, is the submarine, but since they can't get a good signal on it, they're not sure that that's the case. In fact, Bloodbow here believes that it might just be a large school of fish, but Black Anvil states he knows what he's seeing. Down below in this craft that's on the underbelly, we see that Tempest and Stryker are at the ready. I find it funny that however this is supposed to be controlled, it seems as though Stryker's the only one who can fly this craft because there's like 3 levers all on the right-hand side that apparently have to be maneuvered, in conjunction with one another. And he, of course, is the only member of the team who has 3 arms on one side of his body. Tempest states that the guys upstairs seem to be getting restless. Stryker agrees and tells them that they need to simmer down as they're coming up on an aircraft carrier, and Stryker states that he needs to make contact with that ship so he can let them know that something really weird is going on below the surface and that the carrier itself might be in real danger. We then see the USS Furious floating along in the Atlantic. Stryker's concerns are not unwarranted, by the way, as 2 other NATO vessels have already been sunk in these waters, as they receive communication from Stryker's ship. However, the captain of the USS Furious, a man by the name of Captain Rourke, is not happy about Stryker's involvement and is upset that the Navy would even consider employing him for this mission, as he seems to have a personal vendetta against Stryker and is also not too fond of mutants. As Stryker makes contact, Rourke says, what do you need? Stryker tells him that they need to be careful. They're picking up something very strange underneath the surface, and he believes it might be the sub. Rourke, however, states that their readings are showing absolutely nothing, and then yells at Stryker, telling him that, they don't need his help, and that, if you knew what he was doing, if Stryker knew what he was doing and was able to mind his own business, then maybe Rourke's son would still be alive. Now, of course, we don't know what any of the backstory is on that. However, we don't find out because their conversation is interrupted when a huge explosion happens on the aircraft carrier as it is struck by 2 torpedoes. Rourke asks how they didn't show up on sonar, and that's when we find out that not only is the sub itself able to cloak, apparently its torpedoes have cloaking devices on them as well, which means that this sub is super dangerous to any type of ship that would be floating around looking for it. At this point, Stryker realizes that he has to take matters into his own hands as he tells Killraiser to deploy a buoy. He immediately does, dropping into the water, and at this point they can find that the sub is indeed right below the surface between where they're at and the aircraft carrier is. So Black Anvil makes a beeline towards the location of the sub as it begins to immediately try and jam the buoy. Tempest wastes no time in preparing the away vessel for its detachment as we see it break free from the main ship as she and Stryker make a beeline towards the submarine to try and get to it before it can disappear. Meanwhile, below the surface in the submarine, we find that the man who gave the bad news before is having to deliver more bad news as he tells Death's Angel that when they dropped their cloaking device to fire the torpedoes, their location was pinpointed. This, of course, doesn't sit well with Death's Angel as he tells the man to take care of the inconvenience that he failed to take care of before, and that he requires relaxation and does not want to be disturbed for the next 47 minutes, as we see that he has several women chained up in his quarters. He then tells the man that after he takes care of his orders, he should then collect his severance, which is kind of crazy that he's like, yeah, by the way, go take care of your own death after you've delivered my orders to the rest of the crew. And, also, I get it. Like, they're trying to really convey the idea that Death's Angel is like this horrible, horrible guy. But at the same time, like, we've already seen him commit a terrorist atrocity and found out that he has no problem in executing his subordinates. I don't know that it was necessary to also be like, yeah, and he's got women chained up in his bedroom too. That's just the kind of piece of crap he is. But again, it was their choice to write the story that way. Meanwhile, back above the surface, we see that Tempest and Stryker are speeding towards the location of the sub, trying to get there before they lose the signal. But then they pick up that there are some other things heading towards them, and that doesn't bode well as they realize they've been targeted by the sub and they could be in some real danger at this moment. As they scan the surface of the water, they see 2 torpedoes speeding towards them. Stryker says to keep the vessel above water and wait for the torpedoes to pass underneath them so that they can remain safe. However, at this point, we see the 2 torpedoes jut out through the surface of the water and start flying through the air at their craft as Stryker realizes that things are a lot worse than he may have thought, and they're in some real hot water right now as we see that the story is to be continued. On the next page, we see an advertisement for the Killer Instinct Tour Third Leg. We've seen these advertisements before. If you happen to see any of the people on this during that tour or were able to be part of it, feel free to talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more about it. We then get an advertisement for the Cyberforce trade paper. This, of course, is just a collection of the Cyberforce mini-series. If you'd like to know more about Cyberforce, check out my Cyberforce playlist. I have the entirety of the mini-series on there, and we'll be getting into the ongoing series in the future. And then we get an advertisement for the Cyberforce ongoing series, which, as I just stated, I don't have any videos as of yet while I'm recording this video, but there will be going forward, as I have quite a bit of Cyberforce, and it's always a comic that I like to make videos about. It looks cool. I really like the Cyberforce team, despite the fact that, yes, I mean, it is very much not a completely unique and different thing from X-Men is the nicest way I could put that, but you'll be seeing more of Cyberforce in the future. We then see an advertisement for the Spawn Batman crossover comic. I have not made a video on that as of yet, but I do have that book and I will be making one in the future. And then we see an advertisement for Stryke Force, which is a spin-off from Savage Dragon. We have not reached the point in Savage Dragon where Stryke Force spins off just yet, but when I get to that point, I'll start making videos about Stryke Force because I have the entire series of Stryke Force, and I really like Stryke Force quite a bit. So you'll be seeing that in the future. We then see the big 2-page ad that we've seen in several other comic books of Gen 13. If you'd like to know more about Gen 13, feel free to check out my Gen 13 playlist. On the last page of the book, we get an advertisement for the Homage Talent Search, where essentially they were like, hey, do you want to come work for us? Send a package of your stuff and what you can do and your resume, and you might be working for us in the future, which is such a crazy way to try and hire new talent that they were just like, yeah, send us a package. We'll get back to you. Like, you don't even need to show up to our offices to apply right away. Like, that's kind of crazy and unique, but who knows? I mean, maybe it was the best way for them to do it at the time. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Bow and Board. We see a lot of ads from them in a lot of different Image books. They, of course, were, selling comics through the mail, mostly focusing on like limited edition stuff. Here we can see that they were advertising the Cyberforce package ash can. These were the ash cans for numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't think I have any of those. I know I have this ash can for like Pit number 1 and like some of the Youngblood ash cans. I might have one of the Cyberforce ash cans. I always pick them up if I see them. Like, they're cool little like collectible things, even though they're literally just black and white versions of the same comics I already have. They even have an ash can for Cyberforce number 0, which I didn't realize existed. But, again, this is just more of the same kind of stuff we've seen in the past. And I don't know if Bow and Board is still around. That's something I should research. And that was Codename Stryke Force number 1. Overall, I don't think it's a bad book. It does seem a little bit odd that Stryker has his own independent mercenary group that operates, away from Cyberforce, and that, it was never spoken of during the Cyberforce miniseries. We only kind of found out about it after the fact. But, it goes a little bit to maybe explaining how Cyberforce was able to fund itself. That was one of the big complaints I had about Cyberforce throughout the miniseries, is that at no point is it ever explained where they're getting the money to fund this operation. At least with Wildcats, you have the explanation that Marlowe is a multi-billionaire and that he's funding the Wildcats group out of his own pocketbook, whereas Cyberforce just happens to have a jet and multiple high-tech bunkers and incredible levels of technology, and we never find out how any of that is being paid for. Well, maybe it's being paid for by the missions that Stryke Force is taking, potentially. I don't know. But again, they never really say, so I could just be grasping at straws. And despite the fact that I like this comic as a whole, I still think that Death's Angel is a ridiculous villain. I mean, there's comic book villains, and then there's comic book villains. And I get it, it's the mid-90s. He was kind of par for the course at the time. But still, like, bro, how over the top can you make this guy? But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary. You might have thought that Death's Angel is the greatest villain you've ever seen, and that maybe Cyberforce doesn't really need an explanation as to how they're paying for everything. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.